The planet Azura was a lush, vibrant world known for its towering crystalline trees and rivers of shimmering silver. Among its valleys lay the remnants of a once thriving community, home to the Faelori, a long-lived and mystical species. At the heart of this forgotten enclave stood a dilapidated clinic, its walls covered in creeping vines and its once glimmering windows dulled by neglect. Inside, Mirabelle, the healer who had once been the pride of her people, lay alone on a worn cot. Her once vivid indigo skin had paled with age, and her eyes, though still bright with intelligence, were heavy with sorrow. The tools of her craft, ancient artifacts of Faelori medicine, sat untouched, gathering dust. Once, Mirabelle had been sought after across the galaxy for her unparalleled knowledge of healing arts. Leaders, warriors, and scholars had journeyed from distant systems to learn from her wisdom or be saved by her skilled hands. But time had a cruel way of eroding fame. As her body grew frail, so too did the respect of her people. To the younger generations of the Faelori, Mirabelle had become a relic of a bygone era, useless, irrelevant. When she could no longer meet the expectations of her role, the community turned away. Her apprentices left first, lured by the promises of modern technologies that rendered her ancient techniques obsolete. Then the patients stopped coming, choosing newer, faster methods over the painstaking rituals she performed. Finally, even her neighbors ceased their visits, ashamed or unwilling to face the reminder of what they might one day become. Alone, Mirabelle gazed at the ceiling of her clinic, her body weak and her heart heavy. In a moment of desperation, she activated an ancient Faelori device, a small orb that sent a distress signal into the stars. She whispered a single phrase before her strength gave out, "May someone remember me." The signal pulsed outward, crossing the vast expanse of the galaxy, but like her own voice, it seemed destined to fade into silence. On the far side of the galaxy, aboard the Hermes, a small medical frigate orbiting the mining colony of Relon 4, Dr. Ethan Carter leaned back in his chair, sipping a cup of synth coffee as he monitored routine transmissions. Ethan was young, with sharp blue eyes that always seemed to carry a hint of mischief, and a mop of dark hair that no regulation comb could tame. He had joined the Coalition Medical Corps to make a difference, though the monotony of his current post left him restless. The hum of the comms console suddenly shifted, catching Ethan's attention. A faint, irregular signal appeared on the screen, accompanied by a soft chime. Curious, he leaned forward, tapping a few keys to isolate the transmission. "Distress signal," he muttered to himself, his brow furrowing as he deciphered the coordinates. "Azura, that's way off the grid." He played back the audio fragment embedded in the signal, his heart tightening at the faint, trembling voice. "May someone remember me." Ethan sat in silence for a moment, the weight of those words sinking in. He knew the protocols. Distress signals were prioritized by proximity and significance, and a lone call from a forgotten corner of the galaxy didn't rank high on anyone's list. But something about the plea struck him deeply. He brought up the ship's logs, searching for any records of Azura. What he found only deepened his resolve. The Faelori had once been known for their contributions to medicine, but the community on Azura had been declining for decades. No official visits had been recorded in over 20 years. "Ethan, what are you doing?" called Dr. Rhea Morales, one of his colleagues, as she entered the comms room. Her tone was teasing, but she raised an eyebrow when she saw the signal on his screen. "Let me guess, another ghost transmission?" "It's real," Ethan said, swiveling to face her. "A distress call from Azura. An old Faelori healer is out there, alone." Rhea crossed her arms, skeptical. "And, you know the rules. We're stretched thin as it is. HQ won't greenlight a detour for this." "I'm not asking for permission," Ethan replied, standing. His voice was calm, but his resolve was clear. "I'm going." Rhea's expression softened, concern flickering across her face. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," Ethan said, grabbing his med kit. "If no one else is going to help her, then I will. I can't ignore this." Rhea sighed, stepping aside as he headed toward the hangar bay. "You're going to get yourself in trouble, Carter? But, good luck." Ethan flashed her a quick smile before boarding a small shuttle. As the hangar doors opened and the shuttle launched into the void, he set his course for Azura. The journey would be long, and the risks high, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this call, this person, deserved to be answered. "Hang in there, whoever you are," he murmured to himself, gripping the controls tightly. I'm coming. The descent to Azura was anything but smooth. Dr. Ethan Carter gripped the controls of his shuttle tightly as turbulence rocked the small craft. The planet's atmosphere, rich with crystalline particulates, refracted light in a dazzling array of colors, creating both beauty and treachery for pilots. As the shuttle broke through the dense clouds, the verdant valleys of Azura came into view, dotted with the glowing remnants of ancient Faelori architecture, now overtaken by nature. Ethan landed near the coordinates of the distress signal, a wide clearing that appeared to be an overgrown courtyard. His boots crunched against the crystalline ground as he stepped out, medkit slung over his shoulder. Before him stood the clinic, a crumbling building wrapped in thick vines and glowing fungi. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, and the silence was profound. No sign of life stirred within the surrounding forest. He approached the structure cautiously, his flashlight casting long shadows across the cracked walls. Inside, the remnants of a once thriving practice lay in disarray. Shelves of dusty vials and dried herbs lined the walls, and broken furniture was scattered across the floor. At the far end of the room, an ancient examination table lay under a shattered skylight, moonlight filtering down to illuminate the figure lying atop it. Mirabelle, the source of the distress signal, was barely more than a whisper of her former self. Her indigo skin, dulled with age, bore the marks of both time and neglect. Her chest rose and fell shallowly, and her once bright eyes flickered open as Ethan approached. "Who are you?" she rasped, her voice as fragile as her body. Ethan knelt beside her, his expression softening. "I'm Dr. Ethan Carter. I received your signal. I'm here to help." Mirabelle's gaze lingered on him, a mix of disbelief and faint hope. "A human? Why?" "Because you needed someone," Ethan replied simply, his tone resolute. "Let me take a look at you." Ethan set to work, his hands steady despite the gravity of the situation. He quickly assessed her condition: severe dehydration, malnutrition, and signs of untreated injuries. Her vital signs were weak but not irreparable. He administered fluids and a stabilizing serum, his voice calm as he explained each step of his treatment. "You shouldn't have come," Mirabelle said after a while, her voice tinged with both gratitude and sadness. "No one else did." Ethan glanced at her, his brow furrowed. "Then they're fools. You're still here, still alive. That's enough reason for me." Mirabelle managed a faint smile, her expression softening. "You're different." "I've been told that before," he said with a chuckle, focusing on dressing a deep gash on her arm. "But let's save the compliments until I get you back on your feet." As the hours passed, Ethan continued to treat her, piecing together her story from fragmented conversations. Mirabelle had been one of the most celebrated healers of her time, her knowledge of Faelori herbal medicine unmatched. But as she aged and technology advanced, her methods were deemed obsolete. Her apprentices left, and her community abandoned her, believing her too old to contribute. The distress signal had been a final act of desperation, a hope that someone, somewhere, would hear her plea. "You're not obsolete," Ethan said firmly as she finished her tale. "You have knowledge that can't be replaced by machines. That's why I'm here. To make sure you're not forgotten." Mirabelle's eyes glistened with unshed tears, a flicker of strength returning to her voice. "Thank you, Ethan. You've already given me more than I dared hope for." The next morning, the clinic was alive with activity for the first time in decades. Ethan had set up a makeshift medical station using supplies from his shuttle, clearing away the debris to create a functional workspace. He worked tirelessly, alternating between treating Mirabelle's immediate needs and repairing damaged equipment that still held value. Mirabelle, though still weak, insisted on sitting up, her curiosity piqued as she watched him work. "Your techniques, they're different from ours," she said, her voice steadier than before. "Modern medicine has its perks," Ethan replied, glancing at her with a smile. "But I'm betting you have a few tricks up your sleeve that I could learn from." Her smile widened, a spark of her former self shining through. "Perhaps, if I live long enough to share them." "You will," Ethan said firmly. "Count on it." As the day wore on, Ethan discovered caches of preserved herbs and ancient scrolls tucked away in the clinic's hidden compartments. Mirabelle explained their uses, her voice growing stronger as she shared the knowledge she had believed lost forever. Ethan listened intently, marveling at the depth of her understanding. "This one," she said, holding up a dried flower with trembling hands, "can slow cellular degeneration when prepared correctly. It was once the cornerstone of our treatments for chronic illness." Ethan's eyes widened. "We don't have anything like that in human medicine. That's incredible." "It is a dying art," Mirabelle said wistfully, "but perhaps not entirely lost." As they worked together, a bond began to form between them. Ethan's determination to save her was matched by Mirabelle's renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in years, she felt like more than a relic. She felt alive. That evening, as the sun set and the forest outside the clinic came alive with the glow of bioluminescent flora, Mirabelle turned to Ethan. "Why did you come, truly? What made you answer a call that everyone else ignored?" Ethan paused, his expression thoughtful. "Because I've seen what happens when people are left behind. I've lost patients before, people who didn't need to die, but no one cared enough to help. I promised myself I'd never let that happen again if I could stop it." Mirabelle studied him for a long moment, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper. "You're a rare soul, Ethan Carter. The galaxy could use more like you." "One's a good start," he replied with a grin. "Now, get some rest. We're not done yet." As Mirabelle drifted into a peaceful sleep, Ethan sat beside her, his resolve stronger than ever. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain: he would see this through to the end, no matter what it took. The glow of Azura's twin moons bathed the clinic in silvery light as Dr. Ethan Carter worked tirelessly through the night. Mirabelle, the once abandoned Faelori healer, rested fitfully on the makeshift cot he had prepared. Though her condition had stabilized, she remained frail, her body weakened by years of neglect. Outside, the alien forest stirred with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, a reminder that the planet itself was as untamed as the challenges they faced. Ethan double-checked the readings on his portable medical scanner, his brow furrowing as he reviewed the data. Mirabelle's body was responding to the treatments, but slowly. Her immune system was struggling against years of malnutrition and the wear of advanced age. If he didn't act decisively, she might not recover fully. "You're still at it," came a weak voice from the cot. Mirabelle had awakened, her silver eyes gleaming faintly in the dim light. Ethan turned, managing a smile despite his exhaustion. "You caught me. Thought you'd be asleep." She shook her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Old habits. Even when I was younger, I could never sleep when my patients needed me." Ethan walked over, sitting on the edge of her cot. "Well, the tables have turned. You're my patient now, and I don't plan on letting you down." Mirabelle's gaze softened, her voice carrying a mixture of gratitude and regret. "You shouldn't have to do this alone, Ethan. You've already done more for me than anyone else ever would." Ethan leaned forward, his tone firm. "I'm not doing this because I have to. I'm doing this because you matter. To me, to your people, to anyone who could benefit from what you know. You're not a relic, Mirabelle. You're a treasure." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she quickly blinked them away. "Then let us fight for that treasure together." As dawn broke, Ethan began the arduous task of gathering additional resources. The clinic had been left in ruins for years, but pockets of useful supplies remained hidden in the debris. Mirabelle, insisting on helping, directed him to an overgrown herb garden behind the building. Though the plants were wild and unkempt, many of them were rare species integral to Faelori medicine. "This one," she said, pointing to a vine with luminescent leaves, "is called Varashta root. It can purge toxins from the blood if prepared correctly." Ethan knelt beside her, carefully harvesting the plant. "You mean like a natural detox agent? That's amazing. Human medicine could learn a lot from this." Mirabelle smiled faintly, leaning on a cane he had fashioned for her. "Perhaps we can teach each other. If I survive this, Ethan, I'd like to see your world." "You will," he promised, his voice resolute. "But first, let's focus on getting you strong enough to make the trip." As the hours passed, Ethan and Mirabelle worked side by side, preparing tinctures and poultices using her knowledge and his modern equipment. Their collaboration was seamless, blending ancient tradition with cutting-edge science. For the first time in years, Mirabelle felt a renewed sense of purpose, her hands steady as she guided Ethan through the intricacies of her craft. But their peace was short-lived. As they worked, the sentinel alarm Ethan had placed near the clinic's perimeter blared, its piercing sound cutting through the stillness. "What is that?" Mirabelle asked, her voice tense. "Trouble," Ethan replied, grabbing his rifle and motioning for her to stay behind. "Stay here. I'll handle it." Ethan crept toward the perimeter, his rifle at the ready. Through the thick foliage, he spotted a group of Faelori hunters, their figures cloaked in shimmering armor that blended with the environment. They were heavily armed, their movements precise and calculated. At their head was Darian, a stern-faced male who bore the insignia of Azura's ruling council. "State your purpose," Darian demanded, his voice cold as he stepped forward. His sharp gaze fell on Ethan, clearly unimpressed. "You're not of this world. Why are you here?" Ethan lowered his rifle slightly but kept his stance firm. "I'm Dr. Ethan Carter, a medic from the Coalition. I came because someone needed help." Darian's expression darkened. "You mean the relic, Mirabelle?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "She's not a relic, she's a person, and she deserves better than the way you've treated her." Darian sneered, his tone laced with disdain. "She was once great, but her time has passed. We have no need for her outdated methods." "Then why are you here?" Ethan shot back. "If you don't care about her, why bother coming?" Darian hesitated, his eyes narrowing. "The council received word of an outsider interfering in our affairs. We came to ensure you do not upset the balance." "Upset the balance?" Ethan laughed bitterly. "The balance you've already destroyed by abandoning one of your own? She's not a threat. She's an opportunity, a chance to preserve knowledge you're too arrogant to value." Darian stepped closer, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade. "Be careful, human. You tread on dangerous ground." Ethan didn't back down, his voice steady. "I'm not leaving. Not until she's better. If you're here to stop me, you'd better be ready for a fight." The standoff was tense, but before it could escalate, a voice rang out from the clinic. "Enough." Both men turned to see Mirabelle standing in the doorway, her frail frame supported by the cane. Despite her physical weakness, her presence commanded respect. "Darian," she said, her voice firm. "You come here as if you hold the moral high ground, yet you abandoned me when I needed you most. And now, you seek to dictate the terms of my survival?" Darian faltered, his confidence wavering under her piercing gaze. We thought it was best for the community. And in doing so, you have lost the essence of what it means to be Faelori," she replied. "You turned your back on compassion, on the very principles we were built upon. This human, a stranger to our ways, has shown me more kindness than my own people. Does that not shame you?" Darian's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. The hunters exchanged uneasy glances, their resolve shaken. "I do not need your permission to live," Mirabelle continued, her voice rising with conviction. "Nor will I accept your pity. But if you have any shred of honor left, you will leave this place and let me rebuild what you so carelessly discarded." Darian hesitated for a long moment before lowering his weapon. "Very well," he said quietly. "Do as you will, but do not expect the council to welcome you back." "I no longer seek their welcome," Mirabelle replied. "I seek only to reclaim what was mine." The hunters retreated, their figures disappearing into the forest. Ethan watched them go, his respect for Mirabelle growing tenfold. "You didn't have to do that," he said as he approached her. "I could have handled it." Mirabelle smiled faintly, her strength ebbing, but her spirit unbroken. "You've given me the courage to stand again, Ethan. For that I owe you everything." As they returned to the clinic, a sense of triumph filled the air. They had faced the shadows of the past and emerged stronger, their bond unshakable as they prepared for the challenges still to come. Together, they were forging a new future, one that no force could take away. The days following the confrontation with the Faelori hunters marked a turning point for Mirabelle and Dr. Ethan Carter. The once abandoned clinic, shrouded in neglect, began to come alive with renewed purpose. The overgrown herb garden behind the building was carefully restored under Mirabelle's direction, each plant representing a piece of her people's ancient healing knowledge. Ethan worked tirelessly to refurbish the interior of the clinic, using salvaged parts from his shuttle and materials scavenged from the surrounding area. Broken shelves were repaired, diagnostic equipment repurposed, and the walls cleared of decades of grime. Though the task was physically demanding, Ethan found fulfillment in the work, his admiration for Mirabelle fueling his determination. One afternoon, as they worked side by side in the garden, Mirabelle paused, watching Ethan closely. Her hands, once trembling with weakness, now moved with steadiness as she crushed leaves for a tincture. "You're more than a medic, Ethan," she said, her voice thoughtful. "You have the soul of a healer. That's a rare gift." Ethan looked up from where he was assembling a portable filtration system. "I don't know about that. I'm just doing what feels right." "Exactly," Mirabelle replied, her gaze steady. "True healers act not out of duty but out of compassion. You remind me of how I felt in my youth when I believed I could mend not just bodies but entire worlds." "You still can," Ethan said firmly. "What we're doing here, it matters. And when we're done, your knowledge will help more people than ever before." Mirabelle smiled, a warmth returning to her expression. "Perhaps. If I survive you pushing me this hard." They both laughed, the sound carrying across the garden like a melody. Word of Mirabelle's revival began to spread beyond Azora. Travelers and wanderers who had once dismissed the healer as a relic started arriving at the clinic, drawn by whispers of her renewed practice. At first, the visitors came hesitantly, their skepticism clear. But as Mirabelle treated them with a blend of her ancient remedies and Ethan's modern techniques, their doubts turned to awe. A young Filori mother, desperate to save her child from a rare illness, knelt before Mirabelle, tears streaming down her face. "Please," she begged, "no one else will help us." Mirabelle, her strength bolstered by Ethan's support, rose to the occasion. Using the Varashta root tincture and a human-developed stabilizer, she saved the child. The mother's gratitude was boundless, and the story of Mirabelle's success spread rapidly. Ethan watched from the corner of the room, pride swelling in his chest. "Told you," he said later that evening as they sat by the fire. "You're not done changing lives." Mirabelle's eyes shimmered with emotion. "It seems the galaxy wasn't quite ready to forget me after all." The growing attention on Mirabelle's work eventually reached the ears of the Azuran Council, whose members had long dismissed her as an irrelevance. For decades, they had clung to the belief that technological progress was the sole path forward, casting aside their traditions and those who represented them. A delegation arrived at the clinic unannounced, led by Councillor Turenne, a rigid and pragmatic figure who had once been Mirabelle's apprentice. His expression was unreadable as he stepped into the bustling clinic, now filled with patients and the hum of restored equipment. "Mirabelle," Turenne said, his voice cold but measured. "We've heard interesting reports about your activities. It seems you've attracted quite the following." Mirabelle, seated at her desk, looked up with calm authority. Though her body still bore the signs of age, her spirit was unbowed. "I see the council finally remembers I exist. How curious that it took the actions of a human to remind you." Turenne's lips pressed into a thin line. "Your methods are antiquated. The council does not condone the blending of Filori tradition with foreign technology." Ethan, who had been observing from across the room, stepped forward, his patience wearing thin. "You don't condone saving lives?" he challenged, his voice sharp. "Because that's what we're doing here, helping people your so-called progress left behind." Turenne turned to Ethan, his gaze icy. "You are an outsider. You cannot understand the balance we seek to maintain." Ethan folded his arms, meeting Turenne's stare without flinching. "What I understand is that Mirabelle is doing more good here than your council has in years. Maybe it's time you rethink your idea of balance." The exchange grew heated, with Turenne accusing Ethan of interfering in Filori affairs, and Ethan countering with accusations of neglect. Mirabelle finally intervened, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Enough," she said, rising slowly to her feet. "Turenne, you come here to lecture me about balance, yet you abandon me when I could no longer serve your ambitions. You cast me aside because it was easier than facing your own shortcomings." Turenne flinched but said nothing, his silence betraying the truth of her words. "I do not seek the council's approval," Mirabelle continued, her voice steady and commanding. "I seek to heal. That is my purpose, and it always has been. If you cannot see the value in that, then you are blind to what truly matters." The delegation departed soon after, their arguments dismantled by Mirabelle's unshakable resolve. Ethan watched them go, a mixture of relief and admiration filling his chest. "You didn't just stand up to them," he said, turning to Mirabelle. "You showed them what real strength looks like." Mirabelle smiled faintly, exhaustion evident in her posture. Strength isn't about power or position, Ethan. It's about knowing your purpose and holding to it, no matter the cost. In the weeks that followed, the clinic became a symbol of hope and defiance for the Faelori people. More and more visitors arrived, not just for healing, but to learn from Mirabelle and Ethan. Together, they taught a new generation the value of blending tradition with innovation, creating a model that inspired communities across Azura. For the first time in decades, Mirabelle felt truly alive. And for Ethan, the experience reaffirmed his belief that compassion and determination could bridge even the widest divides. Their partnership, born of desperation and sustained by mutual respect, had not only saved lives, it had reignited a legacy that would endure for generations to come. The rejuvenation of Mirabelle's clinic did not go unnoticed beyond Azura. Stories of the old Faelori healer, once discarded and left to die, were spreading across the galactic networks. News outlets buzzed with headlines such as, "Forgotten Healer Revives Ancient Art with Human Help," and "A Human Medic Breathes New Life into Faelori Medicine." The Interstellar spotlight brought both praise and scrutiny to the small clinic. As the days passed, delegations from neighboring planets began arriving on Azura, seeking Mirabelle's wisdom. These visitors included scholars eager to document her ancient knowledge, patients desperate for cures, and skeptics hoping to discredit the stories of her resurgence. The once empty halls of the clinic bustled with activity, filled with beings from countless worlds. Ethan found himself at the center of this whirlwind, juggling his medical duties with the growing attention. His admiration for Mirabelle deepened as she rose to the occasion, her presence commanding respect despite her frailty. Together they navigated the challenges of their newfound fame, leaning on each other for support. One evening, as the clinic quieted and the last visitors departed, Mirabelle and Ethan sat together in the garden, illuminated by the glow of Azura's bioluminescent plants. The peace of the moment contrasted sharply with the chaos of the day. "You've brought the galaxy back to me," Mirabelle said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. "For so long I thought my time had passed, but now I see that there's still so much I can do." Ethan smiled, his exhaustion evident, but his determination unwavering. "You never stopped being important, Mirabelle. The galaxy just needed a reminder, and I was lucky enough to help you show them." Her gaze lingered on him, a mixture of pride and affection. "You've given me a second chance, Ethan. I only hope I can live up to it." "You already have," he replied, his voice steady. "But we're not done yet. There's still so much to rebuild, so many people to help." Mirabelle nodded, her resolve stronger than ever. "Then let us not waste another moment." The turning point came when the Azuran Council, spurred by the overwhelming support for Mirabelle's work, convened an emergency session to address the growing movement. Once dismissive of her contributions, the Council now faced pressure from both their people and the galactic community to formally recognize her achievements. Ethan and Mirabelle were invited to speak at the session, held in the Grand Hall of Azura's capital. The building, an architectural marvel of crystalline spires and shimmering walls, was filled to capacity with council members, spectators, and galactic representatives. The air was thick with tension as Mirabelle, leaning on her cane, stepped onto the dais, Ethan at her side. For a moment, silence filled the hall as all eyes turned to her. Then, with a voice that carried the weight of decades, she began. "I stand before you not as a relic, but as a healer," she said, her tone calm yet commanding. "For years I was left to wither, deemed unworthy because of my age. But healing is not a skill that fades with time. It is a calling, a purpose that transcends the limitations of the body." She gestured to Ethan, her eyes shining with gratitude. This human, a stranger to our world, saw in me what my own people had forgotten. He reminded me that my knowledge, my experience, still had value. Together, we have shown that tradition and innovation can coexist, that the wisdom of the past can guide the future. Her words stirred the audience, murmurs rippling through the crowd. Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady as he addressed the assembly. "Mirabelle's story isn't just about her," he said. "It's about all of us, about how we treat those who came before us and how we choose to carry their lessons forward. She taught me things I could never have learned on my own, things that will save lives across the galaxy. If we're wise, we'll listen to her and others like her." before it's too late. The council's response was swift. Mirabelle's contributions were formally acknowledged, and her clinic was designated a galactic heritage site, ensuring its preservation for future generations. Funding and resources poured in, allowing the facility to expand and modernize while retaining its roots in Phaelori tradition. Mirabelle, though humbled by the recognition, remained focused on her work. Under her guidance, the clinic became a hub of medical innovation, blending ancient remedies with cutting-edge science. Scholars and medics from across the galaxy came to learn from her, inspired by her resilience and wisdom. Ethan, now a permanent fixture on Azura, continued to support her every step of the way. The bond they had forged through adversity became a cornerstone of their success, a testament to the power of compassion and collaboration. As the first rays of a new dawn broke over Azura, Mirabelle stood in the garden, watching the sunrise with a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. Ethan joined her, his hands in his pockets as he admired the view. "You did it," he said quietly. "You proved them all wrong." Mirabelle smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. "No, Ethan. We did it, and we're not done yet." Together they looked out over the flourishing clinic, its halls bustling with life and hope. Though the journey had been long and fraught with challenges, they had built something that would endure, a legacy of healing, of compassion, and of the belief that no one, no matter their age or circumstances, should ever be forgotten.